case was in 1924. It involved two youths, as they were called at the time, late teens, both with, in an era when people went to college early, both already had a college education. Both came from wealthy families. Both were Jewish. They lived in Chicago, and they became first the helpers of the police and then the prime suspects in police investigations of the kidnapping and subsequent murder of a young boy. Once it became known that Leopold and Loeb were the murderers, nobody could explain coherently why it had occurred. The kids were incredibly wealthy. They had their lives ahead of them. They were going on to college. One was off to Harvard. The other one might have been. Certainly was. They both were probably going to become lawyers and prominent members of Chicago society or New York society. They didn't need the kidnapping money and never planned to, in fact, collect it, although that became a point of dispute in the trial or the hearing that subsequently occurred. In other words, they planned virtually from the very beginning to kill the young boy. For people who today watch a lot of television and watch crime scene investigation or sorts of shows, it was amazingly bungled from beginning to end. They left clues all over the place. And it does tell you about the differences, and that's one of the things I'm interested in, the way in which the police operated, types of analysis that they were capable of doing. Police work back then, and that hasn't changed a whole lot, was mostly just a lot of thorough, hard work by a large police force, tracking down every possible clue and hoping that in the collection of 1,000 bad leads, they come up with one good one. And basically that's what happened in this case. And into the story comes Clarence Darrow as their defense attorney, probably the most famous defense attorney of his age. He's a celebrity defense attorney, if you will, and a man with a remarkable record of being involved in high-profile cases in an age when celebrity really matters in America. In a way, probably it's changed dramatically today, the notion of celebrity has. Darrow decides to plead them guilty and then have a sentencing hearing. So there is never a trial. It leaves the prosecution to present all the evidence that it so painstakingly collected to a judge who is probably bored stiff by it. And what Darrow does is focus on the peculiar nature of the way these kids were raised and the peculiar nature of the crime. He doesn't plead them insane. If he'd done that, he would have had to go to trial. But he comes very close to trying to make the argument that they are morally not responsible for what they did, and get the judge to, through that argument, to sentence them to life imprisonment rather than to the death penalty. What do I look at as a historian? I'm interested in the way in which crime is publicized at that time, the way the press covers it. I'm interested in how the story is told from different points of view. And I'm interested in historical memory, the way in which a case like this gets played out as one of maybe a half dozen cases that's been called the crime of the century. It certainly doesn't stand alone in being called that. But I'm interested in the way people remember this case, and so how different decades in American history, your perspective on it changes. Why a movie like Rope, which is made by Hitchcock with Jimmy Stewart, I think in the 1960s, it looks at this case differently than, say, a movie that's made more recently in the last 10 years. Murder by Numbers, a Sandra Bullock film, was based on this case, and in fact is probably closer to a representation of what the case itself is actually like. Not as anywhere as good a movie as Rope, but probably more accurate as a depiction of this case than the other movies that have been made about it. So those are the sorts of things I'm doing with this case, and it hopefully will be a relatively short book, which will be interested to people not just who are historians, although historians are its primary target, but also to general readers, to people who read true crime literature, things of that sort. And I hope to have that book done as soon as I'm no longer chair of the history department.
For more information on Paul Clemens and his research, please visit fas-history.rutgers.edu/Clemens.